Hello there! Last episode, I went over the remote plane on which Jace Beleren has found himself, the plane of Ixalan. I'd recommend watching that video before this one to get you up to speed. As a quick refresher though, during the Gatewatch's fight with Nicol Bolas on Amonkhet, Bolas grabbed hold of Jace's mind and basically... By some sort of reflex, Jace planeswalked to Ixalan, but there, found himself with no memories of his past or who he was. He tried to planeswalk away on instinct, but found himself completely unable. So, there he was, stuck on a desert island on an unknown plane with no memory to speak of. Let's pick up there and see what happens to Jace, alone. So, after Jace was kept from planeswalking, he, completely exhausted, fell asleep right there on the beach. In the morning, he explored, and familiarized himself with his surroundings. The island was about a day's hike in circumference, and completely surrounded by water, so, in lieu of being able to escape, Jace decided to focus on taking care of his physical needs. He built a shelter, which wasn't easy given how much pre-memory loss Jace was not physically active. He fashioned a rudimentary stone knife, and gathered food in the form of things like oysters and fruit. Jace took real pleasure in these activities. When he knew nothing about himself, every new thing was a new discovery. It wasn't long before he figured out how to build a fire, but he wasn't very good at it. After his first attempt resulted in miserable failure, and he cursed his useless island, Jace tried simply willing fire into existence. I mean, why not? What did he have to lose? And guess what? It worked! After concentrating hard, a trickle of smoke rose from his pile of tinder before lighting up, growing into a cozy campfire. It wasn't until Jace tried to cook a fish, though, that he realized the fire wasn't real. He had unknowingly created an illusion, but not knowing the fact that he was an illusionist, he simply concluded that he must have gone insane. But sanity was irrelevant when all he needed to focus on was surviving. And so, days passed, and Jace did things that he thought someone trapped in an island would probably do. He delighted in building a variety of new tools, and enjoyed things as simple as learning what foods he liked and disliked. All the while, though, he was haunted by more illusions he kept involuntarily summoning, most taking the form of people from his forgotten past. He saw Tamio and Johnny. He saw people that he worked with as the Living Guild Pact, the law incarnate on the plane of Ravnica, such as Teza Karlov of the Orzhov Guild, and his assistant, Lavinia of the Azorius Guild. The ones that got to him the most, though, were the visions of Gideon, who showed up every time Jace sucked at doing something, and condescended to him about his inadequacies, and about who was really in charge of things. Eventually, Jace came to the realization that, barring the people he saw, everything felt too real for him to just be insane. He considered the idea that perhaps these hallucinations were actually expressions of magic. He knew that magic existed and that people could wield it, and the thought of, I can wield magic, just felt correct to him. And so, he tried to intentionally create a copy of himself, and naturally, it worked. He was ecstatic. He had a ton of fun just manifesting horses and elephants and stars. But by the time a few days had passed, he was hit with despair yet again as he tried to will himself to leave and still found himself unable. An illusion of Liliana manifested and taunted him. She told Jace that he could fool the rest of the world with his magic and illusions, but she knew that deep down, he was nothing more than a frightened child. Angered, he willed Liliana away, wondering who she was. He wondered if she was a friend, and if so, what kind of person was he if he was close to someone so awful? It was then that Jace resolved that who he was before didn't matter. He was going to make himself whoever he wanted to be, and prove he deserved to live, by surviving and escaping this island. Jace toiled for 5 days straight, building a sturdy raft and gathering enough supplies to sustain himself for a while. He bid the island, which he had dubbed Useless Island, farewell, and embarked out onto the open ocean. While it was smooth sailing the first few days, by the 4th day a storm had brewed, and his raft wasn't able to withstand it. Jace ended up stranded on yet another island. But unlike the last island, which was perfectly livable despite the name he had given it, this one was nothing but seagulls and rocks. He tried again to leave the plane, but for the 3rd time, he failed. He felt hopeless. That is, until he was discovered by a pirate ship. A small rowboat came from the vessel to meet him, and he found himself face to face with the Gorgon planeswalker, Vraska. I've mentioned Vraska very briefly in the past. She was an assassin who, being a Gorgon, could turn her enemies to stone with a glance. She was part of the Golgari Swarm on the plane of Ravnica, a guild of mostly downtrodden individuals who live in the undercity of the plane. She had feuded with Jace for some time, as she felt that he had no right to be the living guild pact, as he wasn't even from Ravnica. Vraska had, in the past, gotten Jace's attention by murdering several individuals whose names sounded like different planes. When Jace tracked her down, she tried to threaten Jace into working for her, but after Jace refused and then outsmarted her, she had planeswalked away. Jace had been investigating her whereabouts before Liliana had dragged him to Kaladesh to fight Tezzeret. But now, Jace had no idea who she was, although he could clearly tell that she knew him. Seeing Jace's sorry state, Vraska brought him aboard her ship, the Belligerent, to get some answers instead of killing him outright. Although she was convinced that he was faking at first, the reality of Jace's amnesia soon became clear to Vraska. It also became clear that the pasty, moody guild pact she had once known was gone, and this surprisingly chipper anomaly had taken his place, whom she likened to a human golden retriever. Vraska described to Jace the very basics of how they knew each other, leaving out info about how they were planeswalkers and also enemies. She also failed to mention that she was working for Nicol Bolas. You see, Vraska wanted to lead the Golgari Swarm to glory on Ravnica, but to do that, she would first need to be Guildmaster of the Golgari Swarm. Nicol Bolas offered her the opportunity to become just that. After summoning her to his meditation plane, Bolas told Vraska that he was uninterested in her skills as an assassin, but actually needed someone to travel to Ixalan, locate a particular object that resided in the golden city of Orazca, and then summon his associate to transport it off-plane. In return, Bolas would make Vraska Guildmaster of the Golgari. After Vraska accepted his terms, Bolas provided her with 3 things. 1. The Thematic Compass, a device that he told her would lead her to the Golden City. 2. The spell that would be needed to summon Bolas's associate through the Blind Eternities onto Ixalan. And 3. Bolas gifted Vraska with an encyclopedic knowledge of how to sail. With that, Vraska left for Ixalan, purchased a ship, and hired a crew. Her crew members are mostly unnamed and unimportant for the story, except for Malcolm, her siren navigator, Amelia, her quartermaster, and Britches, her goblin pirate guy, who really likes chanting. It's a good time. Anyway, Vraska had been sailing Ixalan's storm-wrecked sea ever since then, following the Thematic Compass's lead, and for some reason, it had sent her right to Jace. Soon after taking Jace aboard the Belligerent, Vraska realized she needed to be careful about what she thought around him, as he was seemingly reading her mind unintentionally. Interestingly, when Vraska thought offhandedly about her difficult childhood, about how she had been jailed and beaten as a teenager, Jace expressed earnest sympathy, which caught Vraska off guard. With his memories gone, Jace really was an entirely different person. Deciding that he was harmless, and considering that his talents could be of use to her, Vraska decided to let Jace live, at least for the time being, and told him that they would leave him at harbor next time they docked. After a bit over a week had passed, Jace was adjusting well to life on the seas, when the Belligerent was attacked by a ship belonging to the Legion of Dusk. Vraska decided to confront the vessel head-on instead of fleeing. In the ensuing battle, Jace proved himself to be quite useful, camouflaging the Belligerent and its crew so that they could approach the dreadnought stealthily, and creating illusions to confuse their enemies during combat. During the fight, Jace and Vraska fought side by side against the Legion ship's captain, and when the vampire managed to grab Jace by the neck, Vraska saved him by petrifying the captain where he stood. The pirates had won the day, and Vraska, realizing just how useful Jace could be when he wasn't such a sullen brat, invited him to join her as a permanent member of her crew. Jace gladly accepted. Jace spent the next few days just being a happy pirate guy. He relished in learning the new tasks and sailing techniques that Amelia taught him, and he spent plenty of time honing his illusion making his creations more and more lifelike. Although, the whole time, he was bothered by the voices he could hear in his head, which he didn't realize was him reading the minds of everyone around him. 5 days after the successful raid, the Belligerent docked at High and Dry, the floating pirate city cobbled together from the remains of thousands of broken ships that served as a neutral ground for pirates to meet and trade. Having already fully resupplied off the conquered Legion of Dusk vessel, they were just in town for a few days of rest, relaxation, and revelry. While the rest of the crew went out for ale and cards, Vraska and Malcolm took Jace aside and explained to him their mission to locate the Immortal Sun in Orazca. Vraska elaborated that the thematic compass was supposed to lead them in the right direction, but it clearly wasn't working right. It led the belligerent to him, after all, and as Jace so eloquently put it, "I'm not a golden city." Vraska asked Jace if he could try fixing the compass for her. Shortly after, as Jace and Vraska were walking alone along the wooden streets, Jace asked Vraska if she knew if he could read minds, which Vraska confirmed. Now fully aware of his telepathic powers, Jace felt at the minds around him and realized just how delicate they were. For the first time since his arrival on Ixalan, a partial memory surfaced in his mind of a sphinx gasping helplessly on the ground, its mind destroyed. Jace was confronted with the idea that he'd likely destroyed that mind and other minds in the past, which he surmised to be a fate worse than death. But he decided that people who kill, like him, like Vraska, could be redeemed. And I really like this quote from Jace here. "Existence is adaptation to changing circumstances. The self is an accumulation of what one has learned from those changing circumstances. Our agency gives us the means to alter our own path. You are who you decide to be, and who you will become depends only on how you choose to adapt." Anyway, Jace had asked Vraska to teach him about Ravnica, which she had described to him as the large, faraway city they came from. Feeling considerably more comfortable with him, Vraska agreed to, and in so doing told him the story of her youth there. When Vraska was 17, the Azoria Senate, the guild in charge of designing Ravnica's laws, put out a mass arrest warrant for members of the Golgari swarm. The Sphinx Asperia, then a high-ranking judge of the Azorius and currently leader of the guild, had decided that the Golgari had grown too powerful and numerous, and thus had to be forced out of some of the areas they had claimed. Vraska, despite not even being an official guild member at the time, was caught up in the raids simply because she was a Gorgon, who are typically associated with the Golgari. Those who were arrested were taken to horrible underground prisons, which quickly overflowed, and with the guards vastly outnumbered by the prisoners, riots broke out. Vraska and some other prisoners were moved to a new location while the riots ensued, and they blindfolded Vraska so that she couldn't petrify her captors. More riots broke out, and eventually, Vraska was moved to a solitary cell, where she became a subject for physical abuse by the prison guards. They beat her over a period of weeks, until eventually, she was freed by rioters who hoped to use her petrification abilities as a weapon. She didn't get a chance to petrify anyone, though, before she was pinned to the ground by a guard who was keeping his eyes closed to avoid being petrified himself. He swung at her head with his elbow over and over again, until finally, Vraska's Planeswalker spark ignited, and she was flung from Ravnica. 2 years later, Vraska returned to Ravnica and assassinated many of the officials that had to do with the Golgari arrests and subsequent riots, which had come to be known as the Dusk End Troubles. Vraska took no joy in killing, but back then, it was all she knew, and in her eyes, it was her only choice. She confided in Jace that she was to become Guildmaster of the Golgari upon her return, but was uncertain how her guildmates would view her as a leader. Jace responded that she had already proven that she had what it took to lead, and assured her that she would be a great Guildmaster. He thanked her for sharing her story, and told her that he was proud to know her. Vraska responded with the same. And let me tell you, it's hard to convey without just reading the story and the dialogue, but there were some real sparks flying between these two. And I think it's at this point I can finally say, Jace and Vraska OTP. Anyway, my shipping aside, a few weeks later, Jace figured out the thematic compass. After opening it up and tightening a loose gear, he realized that it didn't just point to one particular place. It seemed instead to point to large magical fluctuations, like what occurred when Jace tried to planeswalk. That's how Vraska had found him. It was just as Jace made this discovery, however, that the belligerent found itself caught between a storm and yet another huge Legion of Dusk ship. Before Vraska could make any decisions on what to do, however, the belligerent was struck by a massive wave, which sent it crashing onto the rocky shore. The storm, and the wave that came with it, were not natural, and in fact were created by River Herald Shapers. As it turns out, Vraska and Jace weren't the only ones honing in on Orazca. There were others, all converging in the city at once, including that Legion of Dusk ship. The heralds, one of whom had actually overheard the conversation about the thematic compass at High and Dry, took the opportunity to set up a trap to try to take out the intruders, or at least buy them some time before they actually managed to reach Orazca. Anyway, now marooned alongside the Legion of Dusk ship, Jace and Vraska made their way upriver on a small Legion of Dusk dinghy, leaving the rest of the belligerent crew behind to fight the vampires who had survived the wreck. Once on their way, Vraska finally told Jace about their identities as planeswalkers. When Vraska tried to planeswalk to demonstrate, it of course failed and the compass pointed right at her. Vraska revealed to Jace that she believed that Orazca didn't just house the immortal sun, but also the enchantment that was keeping them plane-bound. Jace realized that, if that were true, the enchantment probably used the same kind of magic that they used to planeswalk. If the compass was meant to actually point towards the enchantment rather than the city itself, that would explain why it kept pointing at attempted planeswalks, as it was mistaking them for the enchantment. With this information, Jace figured out how to configure the compass in such a way that it would lead them straight to Orazca. Jace and Vraska then spent a few moments in their boat, just enjoying each other's presence, and man, they keep having such cute interactions with each other and Jace and Vraska OTP. Anyway, after a bit, Jace sensed the minds of people nearby. A human, a vampire, a merfolk, and a minotaur. Those people were Huatli, Vona, Tishana, and Engrath. And it's here we need to divert the story a little. Ixalan's story is interesting, as it's basically two parallel stories. The main story, in my opinion, being Jace and Vraska's, and the other being Huatli's. Huatli was a citizen of the Sun Empire who was lined up to become a warrior poet, one of the highest honors a warrior of the Sun Empire can obtain. During a scouting mission one day, Huatli came upon a brazen coalition ship, captained by a minotaur named Engrath, who demanded Huatli take him to the immortal sun, or die. You might be able to tell, since minotaurs aren't native to Ixalan, but Engrath was a planeswalker, and honestly, a bit of a tragic figure. He was a blacksmith from an as-of-yet unknown plane, and every weekend he would planeswalk away to bring back gifts for his two young daughters. One of these trips brought him to Ixalan, and he was, of course, unable to return home. For 14 years, he had been trapped on Ixalan, desperate to find the immortal sun, hoping its power could free him from this prison of a plane so he could return home to his daughters. Anyway, during Huatli's battle with Engrath, she realized that she and her cousin, whom she was fighting alongside, were losing, and were going to be killed. That fearful realization caused something within Huatli to spark, and she began to leave Ixalan, but of course, was dragged right back. Huatli was a planeswalker. Seeing this, Engrath ceased fighting and begged Huatli to help him find the immortal sun so that they could both leave the plane, but Huatli used the opportunity to flee. Huatli had begun to planeswalk to Kaladesh, and for someone unfamiliar, it can look quite a lot like a golden city. Huatli thought she had a vision of Orazca. Given this, when she returned home to the capital city of Pachatupa and explained what she had seen to the leader of the Sun Empire, Emperor Apizek Intli III, he gave Huatli the quest to go out and find Orazca, promising that upon her return, she would be granted the title of Warrior Poet. Ever since then, Huatli had been out searching for Orazca. She had been somewhat nearby when the belligerent and the Dusk Legion ship were run aground, searching for one of the River Heralds to guide her. Fortunately for her, she came across a River Herald shaper named Tishana. Tishana had been the one to summon the storm that crashed the ships, with the help of her fellow shaper, Kumena. Given all that was going on, Kumena firmly believed that awakening the Golden City and using the Immortal Sun's power was the only way to keep out these encroaching intruders, who now had a direct path to Orazca. But as a reminder, that was against what the River Herald stood for, which was keeping everyone, themselves included, out of the city. Tishana refused to let Kumena have his way, and so, after they crashed the ships, Kumena knocked Tishana out and made a break for Orazca on his own. Although she, like the other Shapers, only had a vague idea of where Orazca actually was, Tishana tentatively agreed to guide Huatli to the city, on the condition that Huatli agree only to help stop Kumena, and not to try to claim Orazca in the name of the Sun Empire. Just after those two embarked, Tishana happened to spot the wake of Jace and Vraska's dinghy, despite the invisibility spell that Jace had cast over them and the boat itself. Tishana asked Huatli if she had heard the rumors of the emerald-skinned woman with hair like vines who had a compass that pointed to the Golden City. Huatli pointed out that she had actually seen such a woman leaving the beach where the ships had wrecked. The pair assumed that perhaps a person who had such a powerful item might also be the one creating such an advanced illusion. So, given that Tishana didn't actually know the precise location of Orazca, the two began to follow the invisible boat, hoping to take the thematic compass. Someone beat them to the punch, however, as the following morning, shortly after the dinghy made landfall, the compass was stolen by a vampire, Vona, the captain of the Legion ship that was wrecked alongside the belligerent. She decked Jace in the face and booked it, avoiding looking at Vraska so as to not be petrified. Just after that, Jace and Vraska were accosted by Huatli and Tishana. Once they realized that the pirates no longer had the compass, however, they decided to track the vampire using Huatli's dinosaur mount. Meanwhile, Jace and Vraska tailed them, with Jace tracking the minds of all three, Vona, Tishana, and Huatli. It took 9 hours, but eventually, Huatli and Tishana found their way to Vona, whom Huatli was easily able to get the compass from. Huatli had one of her dinosaurs chase Vona into the jungle, and gave the newly acquired compass to Tishana to inspect. Tishana, with no intent of working further with her human ally, began to run away with the compass, but just as Huatli managed to grab it back, she was captured by Amelia, who, along with the rest of the belligerent's crew, had met back up with Jace and Vraska. With Malcolm in the sky and Jace on the ground, catching up to the compass thieves was actually made quite easy. After all, Vona had been following the compass in a straight line, which jungle terrain doesn't exactly lend itself to. Anyway, Vraska took the compass from Huatli, but before Huatli could fight back against her captors, Tishana summoned a massive wave from the nearby river to chase the pirates away. With that, however, she disappeared into the jungle, leaving Huatli alone. Just as Huatli was about to follow in pursuit, she was interrupted by a familiar voice. It was Angrath. He had apparently been following her this entire time, and he had finally caught up to her, to request her aid in finding the immortal sun again, but this time as a fellow planeswalker. He explained that once they helped each other, they could escape to different worlds, the idea of which admittedly fascinated Huatli. All they needed to do was find Orazca and kill everyone who tried to get in their way. And there's a great quote from the story I'd like to share real quick. Huatli's hope vanished, and a sick malaise filled her gut.
Spectacular,
she thought to herself.
The murder monster wants to be my friend.
So, having escaped from Tishana's flood, Vraska led Jace and the crew of the belligerent right to Orazca using the compass. They were so close now that they could see the golden spires peeking out from the treetops. They had no time to rest, however, as the ground beneath them started shaking, and the golden city literally began to rise up from below. Someone had made it to Orazca before them, and the city was awakening. All around them, earth-shattering, bellowing roars sounded out as the city emerged, opening up like the petals of a flower. The city was beautiful, but they didn't have time to admire it. As the city rose, the ground around it had split open, and the pirates were caught in the middle of it. Jace in particular was caught in a bad position, and found himself dangling from a ledge. But as Vraska reached out to him, the nearby river overflowed, and a torrent of water pushed him over the edge. Moments later, Vraska was washed away too. Luckily, the two planeswalkers landed in water, but Jace hit his head pretty hard. And there, bleeding as Vraska dragged him to shore, Jace began to remember. Suddenly, violently, all at once. As Vraska feared that her blossoming friendship with him was about to be over, Jace's memories slipped from his control, and Vraska was left to experience them alongside him. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, I'd really appreciate it if you would leave a like, subscribe, share this video, and leave a comment down below letting me know what you thought. So, I decided to do a fun little thing and film opening a Midnight Hunt booster box for Halloween. Got all decorated and everything, but it just didn't turn out as well as I'd hoped, so I didn't end up posting it. But, you know, let me know if that's something you'd like to see in the future, in the interim between Magic Lore videos. Or alternatively, let me know something else you'd like to see. It'd be nice to have something smaller and simpler to post in between bigger videos. Anyway, as always, you can read the official Magic stories on mtgstory.com. The first story of Ixalan, Jace Alone, is actually quite good, and honestly, it's really fun to read how Jace's relationship with Vraska plays out over the course of the rest of the stories, particularly in The Talented Captain Vraska and Something Else Entirely. Genuinely, they're some of my favorite stories since release from Kaladesh. Anyway, with that being said, I'll see you next time.